All right, let's talk about Ibrahim Traore and why the West is so desperate to get rid of him. According to Western officials, Traore is a gold-thieving warlord clinging to power in Burkina Faso, a Western African nation they claim he's running into the ground. Well, just last month, U.S. General Michael Langley, let me show you his picture here, the commander for the U.S. African Command, he testified before Congress claiming Traore is stealing gold and using it to protect himself and his regime, as if using the national bank account for protection and the military is somehow criminal when our own government just upped the defense budget to $1 trillion. But anyway, here's the part they leave out. Ibrahim Traore is not a dictator. He's a 37-year-old military captain who came to power in 2022, not through some elite Western-funded election, but by leading a popular military coup backed by everyday people in his country. Why? Well, because the previous government had completely failed to defend the country against jihadist terror groups who, by the way, largely were formed after the violent U.S.-backed overthrow of Gaddafi. Not only that, but the leaders were actually laundering money for self-enrichment on the side, which is no surprise. So the people of Burkina Faso grew tired of being poor in one of the most resource-rich regions on earth. They were tired of French and American influence, tired of so-called leaders who actually took orders from Paris and Washington. And Traore, a young, unapologetically African and deeply nationalist man, became a symbol of resistance because of it. And what the West can't stand is this.
Those imperialists consider that we belong to them and our wealth also belongs to them. They think that they are the ones who must continue to tell us what is good for our states. Africa, our continent that suffered so much because of the imperialists. This era is gone forever. Our resources will remain for us and our populations.
Yeah. These are the words of a man who knows exactly what's at stake. Now, since taking power, Traore has cut military ties with France. He's expelled French troops and demanded control over his country's gold, land, and future. He's rebuilt roads, made education free, and never raised his own salary in the process. He has kept his captain's salary from the military. He's also partnered with China and Russia, and for that, the empire has tried to destroy him. He's already survived multiple assassination attempts and several coup plots to remove him, and the smear campaigns are nonstop. Now, Western media calls him erratic, paranoid, even dangerous, but why wouldn't you be when you're the African David standing up to the old colonial Goliath? And here's what the media won't show you. Across Africa and around the world, millions upon millions of people of African descent are cheering him on, from Paris to Harlem to Port-au-Prince. There have been mass rallies in solidarity with him, and chants of colonizers get out, France get out. This has been ringing through the streets. Now, this is because for the first time in decades, someone is actually saying out loud what so many African leaders have whispered in private, and that is that the age of Western domination is over. Well, joining us tonight is Theo Wilson. In fact, let me just show you this. You might know him. He is a journalist, filmmaker, slam poet, and activist. And until recently, he was actually an advisor to RFK Jr. on African-American affairs. And you might know him from this viral TikTok video on the subject of Ibrahim Traore, where he breaks down the truth after he himself traveled to the Sahel region in Africa, where he met with locals and got the story directly from the people living under Traore's leadership. Theo, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kim.
Okay, so a lot of people in the mainstream media, social media, they're all saying that, oh, this Ibrahim Traore, he is a dictator. People hate him. This is all smoke and mirrors. You recently traveled to the region and you talked to the people and you saw the influence firsthand. Do the people in the region hate him and think he is a dictator? Is that the real truth?
Oh, my God. And the mainstream wonders why they're losing credibility. They wonder why. Like, literally, so I've been on the ground in Ghana, which borders Burkina Faso. I was actually in northern Ghana in what's called the Sahel region. And I spoke to people there. And when I tell you the man's shadow looms large over the continent, he is beloved in countries that have nothing to do with Burkina Faso, let alone where he borders. And the folks, the young people specifically, he's embodying the leadership that they've been crying out for. And because of this populist rise in support of Ibrahim, other leaders, including Ghana's president, is actually starting to take notice and forge alliances. And this kind of upsets the Western power dynamic that they've had over Africa for the last 500 years. So, yeah, they love him. They love him.
They love him. So you didn't
But
hear
they like to love
anybody,
him.
there was like no one that was like, oh, no, he's a dictator and he's stealing all the gold and running off with it and he's just getting rich off of this whole thing.
Oh, no. In fact, people are asking how come their leaders aren't more like him. And so I think what's going on is that he did seize power in a coup. This is absolutely true. The leader he took power from was a man named Paul Damiba. And Paul Damiba had failed at controlling jihadist elements within Burkina Faso. And along with that, there was rumors in Burkina Faso that part of the reason why he failed is because these jihadist elements were being puppeteered by France and he was nothing but controlled opposition. Indigenous leadership, especially in French-speaking Africa, is rising up all over the place. So you have Niger, you have Mali, and now you have Burkina Faso, who are forming a trading bloc. And so it's in the air there. And the countries that border it are literally saying to their leadership, we need to become more self-sustaining like Burkina Faso and profit from our own minerals and not have them extracted through the ECOWAS system. We can get into that a little bit later, but everyone loves them and they want more of that in Africa.
Did you see that there was some development and prosperity? Because one of the narratives we're seeing in the mainstream is that, oh no, he's just stealing everything. And then those that are countering it are saying, well, actually, there's a lot of development going on, new roads. He made schools free for everybody, so that everybody could be educated in the area. There just seems to be a lot of economic prosperity that has been happening since he took over. And he's a young guy. I think he's the youngest world leader right now, or the second youngest ever world leader or something. I mean, he's like 37.
Yeah. He was born in 1988. And so here's what's going on. There has been an extraction economically that had everything to do with the ECOWAS system, which is an acronym for Economic Communities of West African States, and specifically the franc that the French-speaking countries were using within the ECOWAS system was controlled by France. And so January of this year, the Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali bloc removed themselves from ECOWAS. And they said, how can we control our own country if our currency is controlled by our former colonial powers? And with that, they have been able to just execute large-scale development in a way that is really getting the world's attention. So one of the problems with Burkina Faso is that all the towns are separated. They're building a railroad now. They have large-scale road construction, and they have an interesting thing that Ibrahim did, which was instead of buying a lot of cars with the money that is coming in, like a lot of corrupt leaders do, he bought a bunch of tractors. And this is key because the tractors that he bought is something like 400. He dispersed them all over the country, Burkina Faso, and now they're becoming food self-sufficient. Then he invested in seeds that were not the suicide seeds that you might get from a Monsanto, but seeds that actually were organic and, like some seeds are supposed to be. And that's what they're gardening with. That's what they're growing with. And now he's creating aid bags when the USAID situation fell apart. So now Burkina Faso is in the position to deliver aid all over Africa. So the idea that he's this corrupt dictator, like we've seen before, sucking the wealth out of the country and keeping it in his own pocket, it's kind of contradicting when you look at the man held on to his captain's salary. Did not even take a president's salary, even though he's the head of state. I don't see the evil dictator in that, neither do the people of Burkina Faso.
What about these accusations that he is siphoning the country's gold and using it for protection is what, which to me sounds kind of silly.
Right.
I mean, it's like, I'm pretty sure the taxpayers pay for Secret Service for all of our I don't understand what the difference is, but anyway,
Right. No. So what happened was there was a ceasing of the exporting of gold to France under his rulership. And you got to understand something. West Africa specifically is no stranger to corrupt rulership. They're no stranger to people who prey upon the population. This is what makes him stand out.
Mm-hmm.
What makes him stand out is that he's using the wealth to benefit the people. And everybody who knows the history of Burkina Faso knows about a man named Thomas Sankara, who was executed, I believe, the year before Ibrahim was born. And because of the blueprint that Thomas Sankara laid out of being absolutely pro-development, absolutely pro-people, he's the one who set the example of you keep a captain's salary, don't even take a president's salary, and use the wealth to serve the people. And any advancement that happened under Sankara's watch was never mirrored by any leader of Burkina Faso until Ibrahim. So I believe that that's part of what formed the unrest that made the coups happen. They don't want this kind of leadership anymore. They don't want extractive puppets of colonial rule. They want people who are just doing common sense things so that the people in the region, in the country, can profit from what the good Lord gave them underneath their dirt.
Yeah.
How is that even revolutionary? It's actually common sense.
Tell us why you think there's such an uprising around the world. Blacks, Africans, all around the world seem to be cheering this guy on. I mean, they're coming out in droves for rallies in support of him, wanting the West to keep their hands off.
Hands off, yep.
Yeah, why do you think and even here in the United States, I'm seeing a lot of support with in the black churches, the pastors coming out and saying, talking about this guy and this leader and praying that the Lord protect him. I mean, why do you think there is such a rallying around him?
When you are from a community whose leadership has been executed by force, Dr. King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Bunchy Carter from the Black Panthers, you cannot help but feel resonance with other Black communities who have lost leaders by deep state execution. Patrice Lumumba of the Congo. Thomas Sankara himself was executed under suspicious circumstances that fit the deep state model. And everybody in Africa knows it. And so we have all, in a collective sense, as Black folks in the diaspora, have felt the need for somebody to rise up like this again. We tried leaderless resistance. Leaderless resistance has its merits, but actually leadership encapsulated in a person with integrity and with force is something that has hit us all in a very real, deep way, because we know that we need it. So now we have somebody who's embodying this example. And that's why, regardless of where you stand in the diaspora, everybody resonates with Ibrahim. It's like, can we have somebody who's forceful enough to protect what's being built and not use that force to prey upon the people? Here in Black America, we had plenty of greedy, moocher people, who talked a good game, but didn't back it up. Didn't stand on business for the actual people they said they were serving. So Ibrahim shows up and we're like, can we get more of this, please? Thank you. And that's why people are resonating all across the world.
Yeah, it's interesting that, when I look at what's gone on in Burkina Faso and, it's like the West. So the West obviously got into the slave trade and did that until they could no longer do that. And when that was no longer okay, it was like, okay, all right, fine. We can't do slavery, but we'll figure out another way to siphon resources. We'll figure out another way to control. And we'll do it through like these multinational corporations that'll basically just come in and own everything. They'll come in and siphon all the resources, own everything, and the people will essentially still be enslaved to us, but just using economic slavery rather than actual bonded in chains type slavery. And so, and we've seen this play out. What's interesting is that the West kind of has this narrative going of, we're actually the liberators, right? We're the ones spreading democracy and liberation, and they're demanding that Ibrahim Traoré do actual elections. They're saying, how dare you not have elections? You said you're going to have elections in like July of 2024. You didn't. Although they're sitting there not criticizing Zelensky for doing not having elections also. But they're saying, we want elections. And I think that a lot of the world is questioning whether or not Western-style democracy is truly democratic or if it's instead just a way to install, your preferred leaders and control a nation through the guise of this is good for you. It's good for you. You got to choose. It's democracy. When, quite frankly, dictatorship does work for many people around the world. I mean, look at China. One leader, one ruler works for, and the Chinese people are not resisting that because they think, why would we switch him out when he's effective? And a lot of countries feel that way. Why do we switch them out if they're effective? Not that I'm advocating for that. I like democracy, but I also see the downfalls of it. But what are your thoughts on the fact he has not had elections when he said he would in July of 2024?
I think that if he had gone against the will of the people in a way that was a abrupt affront to their sense of justice, he would have faced the wrath of the people. The fact is that democracy is good when you've already got development. But when you don't have development, what happens is that the instability of political change ends up leaking into all the instability economically. And so I feel that what's important for the West to understand is that they're out of integrity when it comes to them actually standing up for democracies. In fact, the West, through our intelligence communities, have been the main ones toppling democracies, especially if those democracies have a socialist bend to them. And I think that this is very interesting because a lot of the propaganda around the West being good has a lot to do with also its capitalist model. But if you have been on the extraction end of capitalism, being subject to colonialism, capitalism don't look as good to you. In fact, in Africa, socialist ideology is more in line with traditional tribal governance. And so there are ways in which those can work together with democracy and make it stable. Next door in Ghana, Ghana has a stable democracy. Ghana is a place in which democracy has been effective, but Ghana's also been stable for a longer time and has more development. And so can we get the basics in place before you start touting the benefits of a system that actually the West says is, good for some, but not for others. And it has stood in violation of that for a long time.
Yeah, that I think we're going to see a lot of pushback against Burkina Faso for the socialist. They say that Traoré is a Marxist and socialist, and but when you're in a situation like what you just mentioned, where they've been extracted for so long, it's a whole different. Same thing with they need a democracy. It's like, well, when a country's really unstable, do they need democracy right away, or do they need to stabilize and set a precedent for a while before they can actually implement democracy? Because if they do implement democracy, then it's easy for foreign invaders to come in and essentially stage a coup.
I was just going to say that, I think it's time for colonizers to find another hustle. You got to find another way to make money, man, because the extractive model, no group of people understands extraction in the dark side of capitalism, like African people. Myself being a descendant of those who were actual commodities leveraged as credit instruments in southern banks and traded across oceans. Like, we get extraction, we understand it. And we also understand that the West has an entitlement to Africa that I think the BRICS alliance is challenging in a very interesting way, because a lot of people, one of the criticisms of Ibrahim Traoré was that he got a lot of his hardware and military support from Russia. And so I was asked by somebody who's in kind of the political space, well, how come they're not afraid of Russia? I'm like, you tell me one place in Africa that they're speaking Russian because of colonization. Ain't one. For whatever reason, Russia didn't take that route in Africa. They speak in French, they're speaking Portuguese in certain places, they're certainly speaking English, speaking Dutch, but they're not speaking Russian. And when the BRICS alliance rose up, what they're doing is they're actually taking advantage of the West's mistakes. It's not necessarily that BRICS is a currency that can challenge America at the moment. It's not necessarily that they're would be besting America in a full military conflict. But one of the reasons, and I'm connected, because you mentioned Ukraine earlier. One of the main things that BRICS needed to prove on the battlefield of Ukraine was that China's the money man, Russia's the force. If you need some muscle, come talk to us, right? And so what happened was they ended up showing I can actually back up the force thing. If they want to fight a proxy war with the West, if any of the colonizers that you have, Africa, try to come back and take you by force, Russia will be able to provide protection. And they backed it up. And Ibrahim Traore took them up on that offer. And how can you tell these folks which coal is hotter if they're dealing with, in one hand, a possible alliance with their former colonizer and somebody who wants to get them off of their back and negotiate trade among freer terms? And that's why Ibrahim went that Russia route.
Well, and that's also why I think the West is trying to coup him, because they don't like the fact that he's turning away from France and instead turned towards Russia. But, you know, it's interesting, and you brought up the jihadists earlier, but it's interesting that, you know, the French military was recently ousted by Traore. He said, get the heck out of here. You got 1 month to pack up your crap and leave, right, to all the French soldiers.
Right.
And, you know, and his whole argument, which was a valid argument, was you guys were here to help us fight off these jihadists, and all it did was get worse. So what are you really doing here? Why are you here? The Russians have a better track record with fighting jihadists in the Middle East. They're willing to give us support. There were reports that Russia was actually fighting the jihadists for Burkina Faso, but they actually said, no, we're fighting. They're just helping with support. And so they've partnered with the Russians on that rather than with the French. And why wouldn't they? I mean, if something has failed for so long, why wouldn't you go in a different direction? Seems to make sense. You know, fire them, move on, try somebody new. And that's what they're doing. So I wonder, do you know if the jihadist problem is getting better or worse in that region?
If the jihadist problem hadn't gotten better, they wouldn't have the peace and stability to do all this development in Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
And so, what's happening is that the Francophone countries, the ones who speak French, specifically Niger, specifically Mali, and Burkina Faso, have formed a trading bloc, the Economic Alliance of Sahel states. And what they're doing is saying, look, Africa is the only continent that doesn't need anything external to survive. All of the mineral, the most arable land on the planet, and all of the wealth needed in terms of manpower, and the youth of Africa, the youngest continent on the planet, has all the makings of developing an economic bloc that could be the new middle class. The Western world has a declining birth rate. This is something that's not being talked about. So I'm going to give you some exclusive stuff, at least in terms of the conversation geopolitically. The Western side of the world has a declining birth rate. China has a declining birth rate as well. Japan has a declining birth rate. The fastest growing population and the youngest population, if you're looking at economic projections, would be the ones to invest in to create a buyer class. And so what the BRICS Alliance is doing actually is it's saying, let's invest in a new model of doing business on the African continent. And if we can have a new model of doing business, that means that we don't need a slave class anymore. We have a group of folks who are, and Africa's got the fastest developing, I believe, middle class on the entire globe, right? That means that we have a trading partner now and somebody who can develop and be somebody who we can buy and sell with. And that's what the actual goal is. And if the West has a problem with that, I highly suggest that they check themselves and their motives and come up with a better way to partner instead of dominate Africa.
Wow. Well, you know, I think we could give them that great advice, but they're hell-bent to not take it. Tell us about Africa. You're traveling there. You know, a lot of us wouldn't even think about going to Africa for any, you know, when I think about going anywhere in the world, it's not typically Africa. I think a lot of us are thinking of it as desert, dry, poor, and maybe even dangerous. What's it like there? And do you see it changing for the better, or people are going to start touring? What do you think?
Let me tell you something. The tourist side of Africa is one of the best kept secrets on the globe. I first went to South Africa a decade ago and had a great time at the Johannesburg Jazz Festival. The beaches in Cape Coast are beautiful. It looks like somebody transplanted Jamaica, and it's right there in the beaches of Ghana. I mean, I'm talking about warm waters. And one of the things that is very appealing, especially about Ghana. I got to show Ghana some love, not only because my DNA test said that I'm majority Ghanaian, but the fact that Ghana is peaceful. I saw the phenomenon of social cohesion at work there in a way that you just don't see here in America. And one of the things that you got to point out, and I pointed out in another video, is the Global Peace Index will rank for you who's more dangerous. Ghana is currently like in the top half of the 100 countries that are most peaceful, right? And of course, that's 100 countries, but 200 countries or so in the world. But guess where the United States ranks? 163rd.
Oh, geez.
Ghana ranks at 55. And there's 4 countries in Africa that rank even higher than Ghana, right? Mauritius being one of them. And America's sitting up here at 163rd in the world when it comes to your safety. And what's going on with that is that they measure who is more likely to be violated by a violent crime per 100,000 people. And Ghana is outranking America so bad that it's embarrassing. They keep that information hidden. But here's the thing. It's one thing to like hear that. It's another thing to feel that.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to Ghana, the kindness of the people, the openness, the friendliness, and the peace there, the lack of this vitriol we got going back and forth, it's almost shocking to the system. And I wish that folks will understand that, like, you get this right, Africa, and you got literally the hot spot of the globe. But this development goes correctly, and I think the West kind of fears that because they don't like competition. And this peace goes correctly, people are going to start seeing what I saw. But in terms of safety, the West can kick rocks, especially America, because Africa's actually got that going on.
So great. Definitely. I think we know like Prince Harry, for example, not that I'm the biggest fan, but he loves to travel there and visit and do all of his vacationing in Africa. So certainly it's getting a little bit more attention, and probably will get a lot more attention, especially with Burkina Faso and what's going on there. I think we're seeing a lot more attention being played on the continent. I want to switch gears real quick and talk, before we let you go, talk to you about your time as an advisor with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What were you advising him on? How did you get involved?
So I was advising Robert F. Kennedy on African-American affairs during his presidential campaign. I was trying to talk to him about how to appeal to Black voters. I saw that Trump versus Biden, these guys were extremely beatable, especially when you look at that neither one of them broke 50% popularity. And there were specific talking points that I knew that the Black community needed to hear, and policy points that we needed to back that up with. I first got in contact with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. because during the pandemic, the same Democrats that said that my life mattered in 2020 told me that I was an anti-vaxxer in 2021 when I said, can you please acknowledge our history of being abused by the medical establishment? How can you say job or a jab or your job to people who are hanging on at the bottom of the economy? How can you force needles into the arm of people who've been medically experimented on since we got to this soil and probably before?
Yeah.
And the only at the time Democrat who would listen was this guy named Bobby Kennedy Jr. And so I began to write, I began to speak out on my platforms about it, and I attracted the attention of a guy named Del Bigtree who said, listen, we need some advice on African-American vote, and we want to have you on board. So before I knew it, I was in Hyannisport, and I advised him during the campaign. And when he joined Trump, I politely stepped away. So, yeah.
So you didn't like him joining Trump? You weren't a fan of that?
Oh, not at all. No. You don't run from what Candace Owens calls the Democratic plantation to another plantation. You don't do that. and not only that, but anybody who was paying true attention to Trump could see the fascist writing on the wall, could see that he was, his policies were going to be deeply anti-Black, which they have turned out to be, and could see that any alliance with him would be something that you would regret in the future. I joined Robert Kennedy's campaign to throw a spear into the gears of the duopoly. I was there for the independent movement, and I believe that there was something forfeited in the integrity of that movement by joining with Trump. And my personal feeling is that the captain goes down with the ship and does not care which vessel the sinking waves may favor. And that is why I had to say no to joining the Trump movement just because my captain did.
Yeah.
I had to go.
Well, what about, I became disappointed with him prior to that. I mean, I actually thought joining Trump was a smart move on his part, but
strategically it was, but morally, I don't think so. Yeah, go ahead.
Strategically, what I really didn't, or morally or ethically, what I didn't like was his stance on Israel. That was, to me, the breaking point.
Listen, let me tell you something. Within his camp, there was extreme tension over that.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
I can just tell you, as somebody who was there, calling him, Bobby and I would argue for days at a time over this. And I was very much am still pro Gaza. I still will ride with what the United Nations in South Africa presented as a textbook. Genocide is how this conflict is defined, and we need to stop that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we saw, so check this out. So as 2023 began to go to 2024, we would make donor calls. And the donors were like, listen, I was on board with him, but I can't stand this stance. Can he just say no deaths for anybody? Can he just say a ceasefire? You don't necessarily have to go full on all the way, but you can't be further right on this issue than Donald Trump. And that's when the money began to dry up. And that's when he became more vulnerable to other options. But had he took the advice of many people in his camp, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would have been speaking at all these universities that had students protesting on behalf of just preserving life. It is not anti-Semitic to say that there's a genocide. It's not anti-Semitic to say that we want the end to what has been judged an apartheid state. It is anti-Semitic to say that it is Jewish to inflict these things upon other people. It is not. The Jewish folks that I know are the kindest, gentlest folks in my friend group. But this is wrong, and we call a spade no matter who dealt it.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted him to say, and he didn't do it.
Yeah, it was very bizarre that he just couldn't even take a neutral stance. It would have been one thing if he just would have said, I'm America first. I don't really need to deal with that. Like, that would have been a very neutral, like, that's somewhere else around the world. America shouldn't fund it because I'm all about America first. And that way you don't even have to say you're for Israel, you're for Palestine. You don't even have to make a statement. I mean, you literally just say, I'm all about America. I want American money for Americans. That's it. I don't want to fund this.
Right. Everybody's like, Bobby, throw me a bone here, man.
Anything.
Throw me a bone.
Yeah.
And the reason for that bone was because we was looking at a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and nobody want that. Neither one of these guys was 1980 Ronald Reagan or 2008 Barack Obama. They were highly beatable candidates in an atmosphere that didn't want either of them again. And I felt that there were strategy points that could have been taken that would have prevented even the move to have to join with Trump in the first place. Yeah. We would have had the money to fund commercials, to be on the debate stage. You wouldn't have been able to keep him off because the groundswell would have been too great had he captured that wind. And so that's what I said. And I never held my tongue about where I stood in support of the Gazan people. Ever.
So, I mean, many of us have just suspected the guy must be blackmailed in some way, whether it be him or his kids or, or something like I don't know. I mean, do you think that he's genuinely in support of Israel to this level, or do you think that there's maybe something else there?
Let me tell you something. I wish it was as simple as blackmail. He is the most rhetorically capable pro-Israel person that I have ever spoken to. I'm talking about if I'm being honest, it seemed to be from the heart. However, there were some talking points that I saw him unable to rebut, and that a logical preponderance of the evidence would say that there is something here in the South African report that needs to be taken a look at. And I feel that there's such a stigma around being branded anti-Semitic because you would dare question the moves of Israel. And I don't think that has as much sting anymore. Mm-hmm. It's just losing its power. It's losing its political punch because the facts are speaking for themselves. And most importantly, The young people ain't on Benjamin Netanyahu's side.
Yeah.
They're just not. And so that's right. That's just what the truth is. And these are the facts that don't care about nobody's feelings.
Yeah.
These are the facts of how history is being written. And I wish that Bobby would have been on the right side of it. And he knows this. I ain't saying nothing new.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. I've spoken to people who are inside of the Trump administration, who are inside of Bobby Kennedy's campaign. And, you know, these are people that I trust completely. And they say that they've had private conversations with him, with others that are in the administration who are extremely pro-Israel, people that we wouldn't, you know, that it's like a head scratcher as to why they are. And they've had private conversations with them where there's no cameras, no reporters, nothing around, where they could freely say what they really think. And they are genuinely pro-Israel, they say. That they just, for whatever reason, in their heart, they're really, truly pro-Israel. That there's no blackmail involved, as much as many of us are just scratching our heads thinking there must be, because this makes no sense. They're saying, no, I mean, they really just, the cameras aren't on. They're like out in the middle of nowhere, and they still are like, yeah, I'm pro-Israel. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's really bizarre.
It would have been easier if there was blackmail. It would have been easier if there was some kind of political calculus to it, but it didn't even make sense in terms of the political calculus.
Yeah.
And so there's what
it must be mind control. I'm telling you, it just must be some sort of a mind control program.
Something going on, but I can promise you this. A lot of people left the camp. A lot of people left Bobby's campaign because October 7th happened right when he announced independent.
Yeah.
And like that was literally that same weekend thereabouts. And a lot of people ended up leaving. And when they spoke out afterwards, it's like, I can't stomach this.
Yeah.
I stayed, but I said, I will not be quiet. You will hear from me on this issue, regardless of, you know, how you guys feel about me. And I stand on it right now. I stand on it. You know, I want this conflict to end, and I want there to be some accountability for what was done to these innocent people.
Yeah, absolutely. Theo Wilson, where can people find you?
Oh man, I am on TikTok next to the @Spitfire Speaking on TikTok. I am right here in Aurora, Colorado. I am in.
Don't tell people actually where you are. Come on.
Right. No, I already said it, Kim.
Stalkers.
Right. Oh Lord, hello. So I'm on Theo E.J. Wilson and Instagram. Just one word, Theo E.J. Wilson, and y'all can find me, talk to me.
Great. Well, we have your TikTok down below and your Instagram as well. Theo, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your insight.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can check out Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. The show airs live. It is a 1-hour live show Monday through Friday. Just head to KimIversonShow.com. See you there.